Coming up next on Another View, a one-on-one conversation with political advisor, media expert, and political commentator Jehmu Greene. Ms. Greene has been on the front lines of politics for more than 20 years, paving the way for women to take prominent positions of leadership. She's the former president of the Women's Media Center, served as president of the Rock the Vote youth registration campaign, and was an advisor and national surrogate for the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. Jehmu Greene is smart, humorous, engaging, and knows her way around politics. After all, she goes up against Fox analyst Bill O'Reilly and always holds her own. A conversation with our very special guest, Jehmu Greene, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Hamm Lee. Welcome to Another View. What a gorgeous day outside, 77 degrees in February. Wow. I mean, but hopefully the weather will hold, although tonight it's supposed to be very, very stormy. So if you happen to be out and about, please be careful. Now, before we get started today, I want to say a very special thank you to the Links Incorporated, the Newport News chapter. Last Friday, I was one of 60 people honored for doing something positive in the community. It was their 60th anniversary, and they honored us, and it was a wonderful, wonderful event. And I just want to say again publicly, thank you to the Links of Newport News. And I also want to send a very special shout out to the employees of James City County. They invited me to be the keynote speaker for their Black History Month celebration. We had such a good time yesterday. We were talking about African Americans' contributions to broadcast news, and it was a grand time. And the food, can I tell you, the food was outstanding. And I have to say, whoever made the corn pudding, you are forever in my heart. So there we go. We really had a good time. Thanks again for inviting me. Now, if you're a news junkie like I am, then you are very familiar with our guest today. Jehmu Greene is a commentator, media expert, social activist, and owner of JSG Strategies, a strategic communications firm. You've seen her on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and other places, sharing her commentary on social issues. And I am thrilled that she has agreed to spend some time with us here on Another View. Welcome to the program, Jehmu. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Barbara.
Oh, thank you. And I know that you're coming to the Hampton Roads area. You're going to be here next Tuesday.
Yes, I'm coming to speak at Old Dominion and excited to be out there. It's been a few years since I found myself in Virginia, so this will be a great trip to really talk about the role that women are playing in politics, but more importantly, the role that we should be playing at a much higher level, and this election gives us an opportunity to do that.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot to say about what's going on in Virginia. One of the things I want to talk to you about today, and that is there seem to be two major issues that are in politics right now that are very female-focused. One is the controversy over insurance and contraception on a national level. And then here in Virginia, I'm sure you are aware that we are looking at this issue of having to have an ultrasound before an abortion procedure, and how that is such a female issue, and actually introduced by a female delegate, but seems to have a lot of male discussion around it. And I wonder what you're thinking about those two things.
Well, I think the country has been watching as a small number of men have been talking about women's bodies and birth control and these personhood amendments like we're seeing in Virginia, and the situation with the transvaginal ultrasound that SB 484 in Virginia wanted to make every woman have before seeking an abortion. And actually, I'm from Texas, and we just went through that same fight in my home state, and where they ended up passing that legislation where any woman seeking an abortion had to get a medically unnecessary ultrasound. This country is, I think, at a turning point, and I do feel that I hear that the woman in Virginia, she introduced the bill, but I think that most of the country, by overwhelming majorities, are looking at these men and saying, we trust women. Stay out of our business. We trust women. And that's going to backfire. It's going to backfire on, I think, the Republican presidential hopefuls. It is going to backfire on now, I think, some of the Tea Party leadership, which is, trying to undercut President Obama's Affordable Health Care Act by using birth control and this fight with the Catholic bishops as their way in to undercut that health care legislation. It's going to backfire in a big way that is actually going to create that enthusiasm that many thought was going to be missing for progressives and Democrats in November.
They really seem to be pushing those hot button issues that get people very emotionally engaged.
They do, and I think what we're seeing is a response to the economy starting to trend in the right direction, and everyone just a few months ago thought that the only thing on the table for the presidential candidates was going to be talking about jobs, talking about where we were in the economy, where we were with the deficit. And as things have started to get better, and this happens, has happened in history many times, the Republicans and folks on the right will then start trying to use these wedge issues to bring out their base voters. And they stepped in it when they decided that, okay, let's take women back to 1950, or I would say even in maybe Rick Santorum's case, back to the 1800s.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. And in terms of his perception of how women should be acting and what roles they should be playing and so forth. Jehmu, I know you're very interested and spend a great deal of time trying to help women position themselves in higher positions in politics. Do you think that if we had more female voices, that these conversations would never even be allowed to start in the first place?
I think if we had more women in elected officials, if we had more women who, not just from a federal standpoint and members of Congress, but throughout our entire political system, at the local level, out in school boards, in mayoral positions, in state legislators, we would see a drastic difference in how public servants, basically support their communities, and how the American people respond to government. There's a real demonization of public servants and a real distrust in the role of government. And if we did have, parity as far as women having 52% of the population, and if we saw those same numbers in our elected offices, not only would there be a greater level of trust with the public for government and public service, but more work would actually get done. Who can look at some of these jokers in D.C. on Capitol Hill for the past 3 years and count off what anything Congress has been able to accomplish, except for fighting up until the last minute on the budget, fighting up until the last minute on payroll tax cuts, fighting up until the last... It's like all they do is not do their homework, and then when the test comes, they stay up all night and try to just get by with a B or a C. And if we had more women in office, government would actually be operating at an A level.
So where is the disconnect then? Because there are more female voters, if I'm not mistaken. There are more women within the population. So why aren't women more involved?
There are so many reasons, Barbara. I think it starts with the media in many ways. You have to look at how female candidates are treated much differently than their male counterparts when they step out and say that they're going to run for office. There's a double standard.
In terms of what they are scrutinized upon versus with the male counterpart?
How they're scrutinized, and there's clear, blatant sexism that they face. We saw it, I think, dramatically in Secretary Clinton's case back in 2008, and we've continued to see it. There was, 1,000 1,000 words that the Washington Post did on Secretary Clinton's hair. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people, look to very provocative commentators and, maybe shock jocks on radio stations and think that's where the sexism lies, and it only comes from, the far right or, even in some
left.
Cases,
mm-hmm.
it happens from the left as well. But when the Washington Post does 1,000 words on Secretary Clinton's hair, that is the problem.
That's interesting because I just heard a piece on NPR actually on this past Sunday, and they were talking about Newt Gingrich's wife's hair in the whole race for being the first lady.
Exactly.
So it's like, where does this hair thing come from, as opposed to talking about the issues?
Hair, it's shoes, it's questions about if someone should be running for office because they have X number of kids. It is questions of past relationships, and that double standard just really, I think, puts an obstacle for many women who want to give back to their communities, who want to be involved in public service, but they took a look at how the media treats female candidates, then they look at their families and the life that they're living, and they, in many cases, make the decision, I'm not going to put myself or my family out there for that level of scrutiny and criticism that a male counterpart would not get. Mm-hmm. So it's the media. That's one reason. But there's another reason that many times women aren't asked to run. In our current political system, whether it is political parties or many of the donors that unfortunately in this environment control a lot of what happens within both the Republican and Democratic parties.
Because when they give the money, they decide who runs, whose turn it is?
Well, 97% of candidates with the most money win. Mm-hmm. And that's, from dog catcher to president. Mm-hmm. You have the most mm-hmm. money in a race, you're probably going to be victorious. And so when all of the powers that be, again, political parties and the donor base and kind of the establishment of the parties, when they go out and they ask people to run, many times they're not asking women. So we have to get past that obstacle and make sure that we are asking as many women to run. So, Barbara, I would ask you, have you thought about running for office? And you should ask every single one of your friends who work hard, who have probably much better solutions than we're seeing put on the table, not just in Virginia, but again on Capitol Hill. Mm-hmm. We have to start asking women to run, and we have to, of course, support them in the same way that male counterparts are supported through the establishment. That's why it's so important for the work that Emily's List does, the work that the Women's Campaign Fund does, because you have to get in early. You have to give these female candidates early money so that they can honestly and aggressively compete with their counterparts.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Give us a call. Join our conversation. We're talking about women and politics and issues that are at the forefront in today's environment. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So, Jehmu, let me ask you, when there were women in the GOP race early on, and they flamed out early on. So I guess my question is it because they did not receive the same type of support that the last four candidates have, or kind of were they doomed from the beginning because they are women?
I don't think Congresswoman Bachmann was doomed from the beginning because she was female. Mm-hmm. I do think that she had carved out such extreme positions that we saw at some point during this past summer where she was the flavor of the month.
Mm-hmm.
And
they had several flavors of the month.
And we might see another one mm-hmm. before it's all said and done. So she had her moment in the sun. She, had resources that she was able to raise. But my understanding from talking to some of the folks who worked on her campaign, and many of them are my colleagues at Fox, that her infrastructure sort of crumbled. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that Congresswoman Bachmann is going anywhere. I think that we have yet to see her true rise, not just as a presidential candidate, but clearly her voice that she has with the Tea Party and her role as a continuing member of Congress. I think she's only gotten started, but in her case, I do think she was in the same way that women on both sides of the aisle are scrutinized and have to deal with a double standard and having to answer questions about her migraines, having to, be critiqued about how much time she spent putting on makeup during the debates. She did have to deal with those same issues, but I think in her case it was more of a failure of operation.
Okay.
But we did see in the 2008 campaign, Secretary Clinton was able to, as she put it, put 18 million cracks in that glass ceiling and get more votes than any woman had ever gotten in her run for the nomination.
So what was the difference? I mean, do you think it was basically because of her ideology, or why was Hillary Clinton able to, as you said, put those 18 million cracks in that glass ceiling, where Bachmann was not able to achieve that?
Well, I think Secretary Clinton had 4 decades of leadership and really working at the top levels of progressive politics, and not even just looking at her role as First Lady and her 2 terms as a U.S. Senator prior to that, when she first went to Washington and worked on the Judicial Committee during Watergate, and when she went to Arkansas and was the youngest chair of the National Legal Aid organization, and all of her work to help create Head Start. She had such a tremendous base of experience, and clearly with her time spent in the White House and her time as the United States Senator, an incredible political operation. At the time, there was nothing that could match the Clinton operation. And so she was able to not just take her leadership experience, but also that operation and really mount. We think about where we were 4 years ago, and even though many people have looked at this current race and said, oh, it's like a reality show, and again, all of the different flavors of the month, but there was a real fight.
It sure was.
About the issues, and such a much, deeper, more meaningful dialogue happening in the Democratic primary race with President Obama and then Senator Clinton.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. What are your questions about women and politics and what's happening in the race for president today and all the other political issues that we're facing? We have a question from Veronica. She wants to know, Jehmu, what do you feel about the media and the impact that the media has on a candidate's ability to win?
The media, plays such an important role on a candidate's ability to win. If you are not deemed valuable enough as a candidate by, it can be at the local level if it's your local news, your local paper, or as we're seeing in this presidential process, the power that these cable news networks and some of each one of the main interviews that these candidates always have throughout the day. The powers that be in the media do not embrace you as a candidate, it's almost equal to the power of money in politics, because you have to get earned media. You have to get your name out there, not just in the way that as a candidate you would pay for it, sending out flyers, doing commercials. That can only take you so far. And so in the same way that if the political establishment doesn't recognize the female candidate as being viable, if the media establishment doesn't have that same recognition, then your campaign is probably doomed from the start. But one of the great things about this new media landscape is that we do have more of an ability to get our messages out there and create a groundswell of media attention. There's more opportunities, and I think that is clearly reflected in Ron Paul's success. So many women could probably, take a page from Ron Paul's book, and even though your local media or from a national standpoint, the media may not be giving you as much on-air time. What he's been able to do is use social media and use his ground troops, in a sense, to create that buzz.
Because social media really has played a significant role, not only in the GOP race right now, but also in the presidential race in 2008. I mean, just in terms of being able to reach people that broadcast in a different way from broadcast media.
Absolutely. And I think we're only going to see that continue to play an even more important role going into the 2012 election. Back in 2008, it was the first new media presidential campaign, and I don't think we've seen anything close to what's about to happen in this upcoming presidential race. The expertise that President Obama's team has when it comes to social media, and the folks on the right, whoever his competitor will be, the Republicans, have also stepped up their game when it comes to social media. I do think it may be, in a sense, like a surround sound type of feel where you can't go anywhere. You can't
get
walk
away
into
from
a
it.
store. You can't open a computer. You can't, watch television. But there's nothing in your life that this campaign isn't going to reach out and grab you and say, vote for this person, vote for that person. But the main impact that social media has is actually having your friends or your family, someone who you have a trusted relationship with, having that person reach out to you and say, this is who I'm voting for, this is who I've given money to, this is why I'm supporting this person. And when you see that, that has more of an impact than a commercial with the candidate just barking his thoughts.
It's all about that one-on-one personal relationship. It really does ultimately come down to that.
Now, Barbara, I would be remiss if I didn't force you to answer my question.
About running for office?
About running for office?
No, actually, I have not thought about running for office because I'm trying to make a difference on the media side in terms of making sure that we cover candidates and that we try to do it in a much more fair and balanced way. So, no, I have not considered that, but I know of friends who have. And some of the reasons that you pointed out in terms of the scrutiny, in terms of the not allowing them to stick to the issues because they're so busy trying to put out fires around other issues that really don't have anything to do with them running for office. And that's a frustration that I hear.
Well, let's make a deal. If you're not going to run for office, find someone to run instead of you. So it's something I try to do, as many times a week as I can, to set a goal of at least this week I will find one person who I'll convince to run for office.
Okay, now
maybe not today, maybe not next year, but put it on a 5-year
But
plan.
See, now I can turn that question around to you too. Now, are you going to run for office?
It is currently not in my 5-year plan. I am enjoying my time as a political commentator on Fox. I really, as an organizer, starting off as a grassroots organizer in Texas and working on campaigns, I truly enjoy persuading people and changing their minds and bringing them into the process. And I think sometimes political campaigns, unfortunately in this day and age, with the negative ads and all of the different ways that campaigns can sometimes suppress the vote, my goal is to bring in, from a civic engagement standpoint, as many people as possible from vulnerable communities. And when that work is done, maybe I'll consider it.
I want to ask you a question, too, because as an African-American woman, and you worked on the Hillary campaign and other campaigns from looking at women's issues and so forth, I wonder if you get the pushback when you want to talk about women's issues, as sometimes people give pushback if you want to talk about African-American issues. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I do look at it as every issue is a woman's issue, and every issue is an African-American issue.
Okay.
And there, especially being in the media, there are efforts and this perspective that comes from a lot of the people who control what stories are put out there, how issues are covered, who are the experts that they tap into, where they try to put us into all of these buckets. So, if we're talking about reproductive rights, that's when women can talk about it. But if we're talking about Social Security, we bring on all of the white men. Yeah. And, if we're talking about racism, then that's when you reach out to Black leaders. And we have to get past that because Social Security affects women and the African American community in much, more dire ways than I would say even for white men in America. And so when the conversation is about Social Security, why aren't women experts the ones who are tapped? Why aren't African American experts the ones who are tapped? So hopefully we can start to move away from being put into these isolated categories and really understand that all of these issues affect our communities in really drastic ways.
And, the reason I asked the question that way is, in looking at your bio, it says that you played a key role at the Democratic National Committee where you ran the women's office. And I think we put ourselves, not we, you and I, but the establishment put ourselves into these boxes because we have a women's center and an African American center and a whatever else center. You know what I mean? And so sometimes it makes us feel like that's the only thing we can talk about, where I agree with your point that it is across the board, that all the issues affect everyone.
Absolutely. And, even though I was running the women's office at the DNC back in 1998, if there was a meeting on technology, I was going to be in the room. If there was a meeting, and speaking again of Social Security, at that time I was engaged in, I just helped to found an organization called the 2030 Center that was focused on getting young people engaged to really understand and support Social Security and the role that it played, not just for our generation, but clearly from an intergenerational standpoint. So if there was a conversation about Social Security, as the director of the women's office, I was also going to be in that meeting. I was also going to be in that conversation. So even though I had that label, I tried to live out the position by making sure that women were at the table in every major conversation.
Absolutely. If you're just joining us, we're talking with social activist, commentator, and media expert Jehmu Greene. Jehmu is with Fox News and shares her social and political commentary as a frequent guest on MSNBC and CNN as well. Jehmu, I have got to ask you before I take this phone call about your involvement with Fox News, because I watched interview after interview with you going up against Bill O'Reilly, and I have to tell you, I'm very proud of you. You hold your own. And I'm just curious as to how that relationship started.
My relationship with Fox News started, actually, speaking of my time at the DNC in 1998. I recall doing segments on Fox at a very early point. And, it was always that debate style, where you're being interrupted and, you're trying to get your point out there, and maybe the voices are a little bit more raised than this conversation we're having. But, fast forward many years later, actually, when I had just left Rock the Vote, after running that organization for 5 years, I had the opportunity to meet Roger Ailes, who is the CEO of Fox, and that was back in 2005, and I started, really through that relationship to have more opportunities to get the message out there, supporting vulnerable communities, trying to engage as many women, engage as many people of color, and as many young people in the process as possible. And I mean, the reality is I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, because Fox has the largest audience, and as an organizer, I want to talk to as many people as possible, and I want to talk to independents and people who are up for grabs, and that is such an important part of Fox's audience. So I couldn't be more happy to have an opportunity to go up against Bill O'Reilly, go up against Sean Hannity, whoever it is, because through that dialogue, through that debate, it's not about how you're interacting with a host per se. It's about what the audience is taking away from it.
I want to ask you something because I hear this about women often. And so, and I'm curious as to your reaction. I notice that when you are up against them, you don't raise your voice. You stay on point and you continue to make your point, regardless of whether they try to get you to sidetrack or say something else. You know, you stick to the point. Is that a style that you developed based on the perception sometimes that women get hysterical, if you will, or they are easily swayed off of their point? Because I just noticed you're very deliberate in your delivery.
I think it probably has more to do with just from a media training standpoint than like any sort of reaction to not wanting to come across as being hysterical or, you know, in the case that we
and
just
that's
saw
a stereotype
with Michelle
that people
Obama
have, yeah.
as an angry black woman.
Right.
But, you know, again, it's what is the most effective position and presentation to really make a connection with the audience, to make a connection with that young person in Texas who happens to be watching. And when I say that young person in Texas who happens to be watching, I'm actually always thinking of my brother, God bless him, who when I would go home on visits for many years and I'd say, oh, turn the television on, I need to watch the news. And he would always turn to Fox News. And he had never voted for a Republican. He, you know, is an evangelical, really focused on, you know, helping those who are most in need. And I would ask him, I'd say, oh, why do you watch Fox? Why don't you watch CNN? And he'd say, well, they're the most entertaining. They keep me engaged. And so when I'm on air, I'm like, who is, you know, what's the best presentation to reach that person?
Got you. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Lisa joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Lisa.
Yes, this is a fascinating subject, and your guest is marvelous.
Thank you.
I don't watch Fox, and I don't get the local paper, but I did yesterday. It was around where I was over at Old Dominion yesterday. Mm-hmm. And when I saw this whole thing in the General Assembly, and it was actually a picture of this Representative Jill Holtzman from Fauquier County, it says. And I could just imagine the social media of the mounted class up in the hills of Orrington. You know, they're up on their horses, and she walks by, and they turn around and take another pass. I can't even imagine if she has daughters or people that have a brain around there that are going to speak to her ever again. You know what I'm saying?
So you're responding to the delegate who actually brought forth the bill to have the ultrasound done.
Yeah, I was surprised to see her picture. I had no idea where this person, you know, it's in passing.
So you were surprised it was a woman?
I'm just, like here I'm seeing a General Assembly in her picture, and then I read down and it says Fauquier County, and my mind immediately goes to the way the mounted class, you know, is. You know, they just turn their horse and take another trail where they don't want to see you again. That's the social media, you know, in hunt country.
Okay. Lisa, thanks so much for the call. We appreciate that. I don't know if you have a reaction, Jehmu.
Just happy to have her engaged
Absolutely.
in the conversation.
Absolutely. You talk about your involvement in terms of being a social activist and a grassroots activist, something that President Obama was also, a grassroots activist. That at one point had a really bad name. Have you been able to turn that around?
I hope so. I think there's clearly a lot of work that has to be done when you have such a negative response to someone being a community organizer. And again, that's why I think it's issues like that would be drastically changed the more women are able to work their ways in as public servants. That public service in and of itself, whether you're a community organizer or you are a city council member, is something that should be applauded. It's something that our country could not survive without, and for it to have gotten such a bad rap, I think in many ways with the rise of the Tea Party, we do have a lot of work to turn that around, and it's just day in, day out, continuing to show how not just organizers, but how the government really does play a valuable role in everyone's life and moving our country forward from a progress standpoint. Think of how far we've come on through so many different social movements, whether it's the suffrage movement for women's rights to vote, the civil rights movement. Now, as we're seeing, more states, and it just passed in Maryland with same-sex marriage.
Yes.
More states really embracing and understanding that gays and lesbians are the next frontier of the civil rights movement, and hopefully the same thing will happen from an immigration standpoint, where immigrants won't be as demonized. But all of these different movements, all of the progress that we've seen, all of the rights that should have been for there for different communities from the start of our country, but unfortunately weren't. That progress has happened on the backs of organizers, on the backs of activists, and we can't simply stop and say the Tea Party is right, and anyone who tries to organize or help government in any way, shape, or form is demonized. That is the unfortunate result of what we've seen in the last couple of years.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Brian joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Brian. You're on the air.
Hello. How are you doing today?
Doing good.
Real quick background on myself. I am from California. I'm a government employee. I used to vote Republican. Now I'm independent. I've lived in Florida. Just returned from South Carolina and living in Virginia again. I'm very, very aware of the media and reports and the way things are proceeded and produced these days. So I'm wondering, how does your guest, being from a Democratic background, maintain balance and fairness when she's working for a company that has such a public perception of being a Republican favoritism, conservative, far-right, and in a way, very off-balanced in their reporting? Because Fox News is never someplace that I go to when I'm thinking of fair and balanced news.
All right, let's let her answer. Thanks for your call, Brian. I appreciate it. Jehmu?
While I'm debating someone who is either a Tea Party leader or a representative of the Republican Party, that is the fair and balance. And I've always
because you bring the other side to the conversation.
That's absolutely my intent, and I know that I have many opportunities to provide that balance and provide an opposite opinion. Now, the reality is, Fox News has always been very upfront about their opinion commentary, and whether it's Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly, and but even the host of the show may be to the right, but when they put guests on, there is an opportunity to make your case. And again, if you're given that platform, I have to embrace that platform in which I'm able to talk to the largest audience, the audience that has the most ability. In my way, the way I look at it is it's the movable middle. So I have no interest in talking to people who think like I do already, who already agree with me on every issue. I have no interest in preaching to the choir.
I was going to say, there's no reason to turn them around.
I'm an organizer, and my job is to reach out to those communities and those individuals that might be on the fence, might have the wrong idea or wrong opinion about an issue, and to convince them to bring them over to my side.
Since you are coming to Old Dominion University next Tuesday, February the 28th, for the Friends of Women's Studies annual dinner, and you are the keynote speaker, Elizabeth writes in, wants to know, what steps can colleges take to influence women's interests in politics?
Great question. And, one of the things that I think is going to happen, without any work on our part, well, I do, there probably is work that needs to happen, but the reality is more women than men are going to not just undergraduate, but now graduate programs. More women than men are in, I think, every professional aspiration, whether it's, journalism degrees, which a lot of people, end up going from communications into politics, or political science pursuits on campuses, that we've already, from just a population standpoint, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as these generations are graduating and have been in the workforce, it's going to be unstoppable. That we're going to see a continued increase in women's political participation. But we can't just wait for that wave to happen. And it is important for colleges, I think, to encourage women by, one, bringing as many women leaders to campus as possible. I know there have been studies at times that look at, which speakers have been tapped and, on the speaker circuit, how it is completely unbalanced between men and women who have opportunities on the college speaker circuit. That's something that every campus administrator can, make a pledge and say it's going to be 50-50, or because it hasn't been balanced for the past 50 years, we're going to, for the next 10 years, we're going to bring 80% women. They could go all the way in that direction. So parity in who you're bringing to campuses is important. Opportunities for women to really learn about politics while they are on campus are as important. And I think we've also, just because of the populations on campuses now, we've seen that so many women are becoming those student leaders. They are running for office. So again, that's part of the wave that's just going to naturally happen. But I do think there are ways that campuses can make that transition easier for the students while they're there. And, whether you look at it as affirmative action or just however you want to, term it, like they should put a very concentrated focus on recruiting women for student government positions, recruiting women for speaker circuit opportunities, recruiting women to have an opportunity to be leaders in any way possible, because it goes back to, if you're not asking women, then they're not going to, in many ways, as our male counterparts, raise their hand and say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to step up. Absolutely. Because, a man can read a paper. Many men will read a newspaper, read an article in the morning, and by that afternoon say, yeah, I'm an expert on that issue. I can talk about this. I can make a speech about this. And so many times women, we don't own our expertise. There's always, I need to get that next degree to really be an expert. I need to, spend 5 more years doing the work. And many young men, they don't put those obstacles in front of them. They just jump out there and say it, whether it actually presents themselves as an expert or not. It's like sometimes. That Holiday Inn commercial. I slept at a Holiday Inn, so yeah, I can do this surgery. So, and to expand on this a little bit, the idea of the Sunday morning talk show would also be another place where we need to see more women. Would you agree? Absolutely. And I know the Women's Media Center, in just the last couple of weeks, put out their annual Status of Women in the Media report. And unfortunately, even though time has passed, we haven't seen the increases in women's participation on those Sunday talk shows, on op-ed pages, on editorial boards, however you dissect the media, the women who are behind the scenes, the decision makers. It's like we stagnated. And in some of those places where the report touches on, we've actually taken steps backwards. I think a lot of the numbers coming out of Hollywood, as far as even directors and who's controlling content from an entertainment standpoint, we've taken steps backwards. And so we have to keep a really focused eye on the role that women are playing in these decision-making positions across the media landscape and holding these outlets accountable. We have to hold the NBCs and CBSs and ABCs of the world accountable to not just having females as hosts of their shows. We've seen some progress there, and at one point it had Christiane Amanpour, Katie Couric, and Diane Sawyer, all leading major news programs. So those were steps in the right direction, but it's also about who they're putting on air as guests and experts.
Mm-hmm. And you also, this also plays into the decisions made by the producers and the executive producers and so forth, because even on a local level, we spend a great deal of time. If you don't have women and minorities represented in those ranks, then you get a certain perspective on the air based on who's actually making the decisions.
Yes, it is, Barbara, so much about those decision-making positions where, again, if you have all women as the hosts, but the people behind the scenes, the producers, the news directors who are deciding what stories are going to be covered for the day, you can't tell the whole story if you leave out half the population.
Absolutely. And as a former news director, and at the time the only African-American female news director in the top 50 markets, I understand exactly what you're talking about, because you do need a representation of everyone that your community serves in order to make sure that you can be as fair and as balanced in the media as you'd like to be.
It's a much more in-depth coverage that happens when women are engaged in those positions.
Absolutely. So, Jehmu, you're coming next Tuesday, and we've only got about 2 minutes left in the show. What do you plan?
Wow, time flew by.
It doesn't fly, I know. What do you plan to talk to the women about next week, and those who are coming to the dinner?
Dare to compete. And I take that phrase actually from a speech that Secretary Clinton did at the launch of the State Department's Women in Public Service Colloquium from a couple of months back in December, but really daring women to compete, daring women to raise their hand and say, I am an expert, I can answer that question, I can lead this debate, I can run this campaign, I can run for office, but it's not just on fixing the systems, whether it's media or the political establishment, it's really, as women ourselves, daring our counterparts to compete.
Well, I am so looking forward to it. The Jehmu Greene will be with us at Old Dominion University on February the 28th. That's next Tuesday. Dinner's at 7 p.m. And this is a fundraiser for the Friends of Women's Studies Department at ODU. And I will have the pleasure of serving as MC for that event. So I look forward to meeting you in person, Jehmu. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Barbara, and I will be asking you that question when I see you in person again.
Okay, I'll see you on Tuesday, and we'll be right back. And welcome back. It is Black History Month, and we have a very special story for you. Ruby Bridges was born the same year that the United States Supreme Court ruled on Brown versus Board of Education, the case that ended legal segregation in the nation's schools. Ruby was just 6 years old when her parents answered the NAACP's call for volunteers to be the first to integrate New Orleans schools. She recently shared her memories of the past and thoughts about the future with a diverse crowd at Old Dominion University.
Ruby Nell Bridges lived just a few blocks from the all-white William Frantz School, but she attended an all-black school miles away. When the NAACP asked for volunteers to help desegregate the New Orleans school system, Ruby's mother thought it was a good idea to volunteer Ruby. Her father was adamantly opposed. He was not only concerned about Ruby's safety, but the safety of his entire family. Ruby's mother convinced him that the change would allow 6-year-old Ruby to get a better education and ultimately a better life. Like many children selected to desegregate America's schools, Ruby had to take an especially difficult test to see if she qualified to attend an all-white school. She took the test and passed it. On the first day of school, in an effort to protect the 6-year-old from an angry white mob, she had to be escorted by U.S. Marshals. Fast forward 50 years, and Ruby vividly remembers what the crowd was chanting as she walked by.
The people shouting 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate.
On the first day of school, Ruby and her mother sat in the office the entire day. The second day, it was Ruby, her mom, and the teacher. On the third day, Ruby went alone. She would remain the only student in her classroom, isolated on a separate floor for the entire school year. making her mark in history as the first African-American child to attend an all-white elementary school in the South. Truly, institutions have made a lot of progress. For me to sit here and say, oh, no, they haven't, I would have to dismiss the sacrifices I made, my parents made, Dr. King made, so many people. I would have to dismiss that. I refuse to do that. We have made huge amounts of progress, but that doesn't mean that you stop. You have to continue, and you have to make progress every day. We have got to set our differences aside and come together to make the progress that our ancestors and people made 50 years ago. People did come together to do that. I mean, it wasn't all one race. And we have to understand that that's what we are going to have to do, or we're not going to make any progress. On that historic day in 1960, Ruby Bridges says she didn't know why she had to endure so much. It was years later, when her brother was killed in a drug-related shooting, that she began to see the significance of her contribution to the civil rights movement. She made it her mission to help at-risk children and even began doing volunteer work at William Frantz School. She established the Ruby Bridges Foundation and now travels around the country speaking to schools about the importance of education and the integration of races. Her thoughts on education and what we as a community can do to keep kids in school? We have to make it interesting, and I think there's nothing more interesting than the truth. Since Ruby Bridges first walked through the doors of William Frantz School, her story and her sacrifice have been told time and time again. Disney made a TV movie based on her life. The book, The Story of Ruby Bridges, was published in 1995. Ruby was reunited with her first-grade teacher, Mrs. Henry, on The Oprah Winfrey Show, and she was featured in the television series Eyes on the Prize. And when you look at that famous Norman Rockwell painting of 6-year-old Ruby in her pretty white dress being escorted into school by 4 large U.S. Marshals, you can't help but take a minute and think about what the climate of our country must have been like in 1960 and where we are today. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Incredible, incredible story. Now time for some events happening in Hampton Roads. You're invited to attend the Show and Grow Your Prose open mic event tomorrow, Saturday, February 25th at 10 a.m. at the Meyer Orbendorf Central Library in Virginia Beach. Playwright and director Terrence Affer Anderson will do a reading from his new novel, Resurrection, A Love Story. Call the library for more information. And on Sunday, February 26th, the Surrey County African American Heritage Society presents an evening with Mary E.C. Drew, author of One Common Country for One Common People. It's at 2:30 p.m. at the Surrey County High School Auditorium in Dendron, Virginia. Call 757-866-0174 for more information. There are other events on our website, anotherviewradio.org, and while you're there, sign up for our eView newsletter, a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. We really appreciate the fact that you joined us here today. For producer Lisa Godley, audio engineer Perry Smith, Megan Herrera, who answered the phones, and she also served as the associate producer for the Ruby Bridges story. I'm Barbara Hamm Lee. Be sure to join us next Friday at noon as we talk about taxes on Another View. Have a good weekend, everyone.